Bam! What's going on, folks? MC is in the house. My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I am here every Wednesday at noon Eastern Standard Time. Talk about a topic, deep dive, answer some questions, get a little interaction and feedback going on, and have a good time while doing it. I appreciate you guys watching. I know you guys are busy, and any time you invest in me is time well appreciated. Grateful for that. As far as housekeeping is concerned, if you have not yet signed up for my email list, go to masterchim.com. All the relevant links are in the description below, whether you are watching on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or is it X now, whatever the fuck it's called. But you can go find the links there and do what you got to do. So let's see, comments. Johnny Groob in the house, Kids in the Hall reference. Yes, you got that. You got that reference with the thumbnail, the I'm crushing your head reference, and very relevant to today's topic. Not Kids in the Hall, but when we're talking about tyrants. Jesse, what's going on, brother man? Good to see you. Corey, good afternoon to you, brother. And Big Joe, same to you, my friend. Okay, so as you guys have questions as I am describing and getting into the stuff that I'm going to talk about today, please feel free to put it down so you don't forget it. I might get to it later on. If you could put your feedback in the form of a question, it'll help me answer it. If I answered it before I got back to reading it, then I will say as much, but I'm always getting confused, and I always feel bad for the people who are trying to get some info that I promised, and I just don't understand when or what they're referring to. If I say something, about a topic, and then you write, well, what does that mean? And I'm talking for 10 minutes before I see the question, it's just hard for me to follow. So all that being said, Felix Mendez in the house. What's up, brother man? How you doing? Good to see you. Good to see you well. All right, so today we're talking about the mind of the tyrant leader. The mind of the tyrant leader. In the thumbnail, you got to see an individual who is doing the crushing head, Kids in the Hall reference there. And Jigsy Johnson, good morning from the bottom of Australia. Good to see you. In the thumbnail, you have that I'm crushing your head, and it says I'm crushing, leading you. And I think it's not exactly, a puzzle, a mind-bending puzzle, what the thumbnail was in reference to. But it starts with what a tyrant is, and we begin to understand how a tyrant thinks, and their actions become predictable. Now, full disclosure, this is kind of what I coach in. This is certainly a part of the entirety of my content and the process, the system, the 3-road system that I use for my coaching. But I will say it's not only dealing with tyrants, which seems to be what everybody assumes is the most valuable, content when it comes to learning about tyrants. I got a tyrant, my boss is a tyrant, or my wife is a tyrant, or, my friend is a tyrant, whatever the case is. In my experience, it's usually more valuable when I'm helping individuals who are tyrants learn how to not act so destructively in their alliances. When there are people who are functional in so many different ways, but in certain aspects of their behavior, certain topics, they become tyrannical. An example of that is somebody who is a great friend, and you hang out with them, you have a great time, overlapped, rituals in common, sports or lifting weights or whatever the things you're into, photography, but then as soon as money is brought up, the guy becomes a tyrant. The guy becomes, wait a minute, or who's going to watch the money and who's going to count it and it's like he becomes this different person when talking about money in this example that I'm giving. So sometimes people could have a absolutely functional demeanor, temperament, and process when facing their life or engaging their life, but there may be these one or two aspects of their life, their personality, where the tyrannical protocols come to surface, right? And I do a lot of work with individuals like that as well. Usually it's the business owners. I My mastermind group, for example, is for men entrepreneurs, and it is an issue with entrepreneurs whereby they have a complete understanding of what it is they want to do. And they somehow think that when their workers, their employees don't understand, or when their employees are doing a bad job or whatever it is they're assigned to, they think the solution is saying it again and saying it louder, or saying it while piling on consequence for doing it wrong. And it's just a disconnect that sometimes a tyrannical perspective will sort of trap somebody in. It's that tunnel vision that they can't get out of. And we have a lot of ways to get away from that, right? So, Big Jamie, what's up? Cherrytown Vibe, what's going on, brother man? Good to see you. So, let's start off with what a tyrant is, right? Now, I defined a tyrant in Tribalnomics, my book, as an individual who ignores, disregards the identity of another individual. A tyrant is somebody who, because they see other identities, other people, as tools to be utilized, the preferences of the identity do not come into any way into the equation. They don't care what the individual has going on, or what the individual would prefer, or what the individual's even rights are. It doesn't matter to them. Other individuals are tools. And this is from the perspective of a tyrant. So there is a complete disregard for the identity of the other person. Now, when we're dealing with tyrants, there's a couple of telltale signs, when we're dealing with tyrants. And I think that these signs help us not only identify tyrants that we're engaging with, but may also, like I mentioned before, help you identify those times where you yourself are being tyrannical in how you're conducting your affairs. Tyrants will often tell somebody what to do. This is the easy one, right? They tell somebody what to do without any acknowledgement of the authority with which to do so. They take charge and start barking orders, and nobody fucking chose them to be the boss. Nobody designated them the person who should be making these decisions. The tyrant has no regard for the other identities, so it's sort of like, well, there's a car and somebody needs to drive, and it's me in 3 months. That's the reality of the tyrant's perspective. Of course I'm going to drive. Who else would drive? I'm the one who should be in charge, obviously, so I am going to be in charge. And that's an easy way for somebody to identify a tyrant. Another tyrant, a subtle application of how you can see a tyrant, is the relationships that they're able to maintain around them. Now, to a tyrant, I'm going to simplify this. Yarn Saxo, what's up? Good to see you. To a tyrant, there is a binary dynamic amongst identities. Hammer, nail. Hammer, nail. So with a tyrant, you will see them only to maintain alliances where the individuals present themselves as nails in the hammer-nail dynamic, right? So oftentimes, children who are raised by tyrants are nails. And some of them grow up to remain nails. Some of them take on the role of nails, but they see themselves as baby hammers, right? So you will see oftentimes the child who is raised by a tyrant learning tyrant protocols themselves. And that is reflected in how their relationships are engaged as an adult. Co-workers, sometimes you'll have a tyrant celebrity, or a tyrant, somebody who has great value and authority, and the dynamic between them and the people around them, they have that diva-esque energy. They can only be surrounded by people who are passive, downright submissive around them, who are willing to put on a nail suit in order to deal with them. I would advise anybody who has ever heard of Sayak Kali to go and find a training association around you and start learning Sayak, because Sayak has a very intricate system of feeding, being the feeder. And the feeder would be the individual who is initiating, and orchestrating the series of events, the movement that we're experiencing to the best of their ability. They're the ones that are putting the control on a sequence of events. And it is always going to be better than the person who resides at the opposite end of the spectrum, who I had used nail earlier in the Sayak feeder paradigm. It would be the receiver, right? You never want to be the receiver. You never want to be the nail. So when we look at individuals who, as tyrants, basically go around and say, I'm the one in charge, I'll reference Aaron. Good to see you. I'll reference the way that I describe this in Tribalnomics in the book. The tyrant falls under the autocratic leader type, right? So autocratic leader types, as described in the book, I described the tyrant and the general. Now, the distinction between the tyrant and the general, both of them autocratic leader types. The tyrant is the one who says, I decide what the mission is. So you need to stay connected to me, and I will let you know what we're doing, and to a certain extent, therefore, who we are, right? I will let you know. Whereas the general is different. The general also has no bandwidth or allowance for the offset of the individual. Who you are and what you want to do doesn't matter to me, says the general. But for a different reason, and the distinction between the general and the tyrant is the general has an external mission that he is being loyal to. So a general is saying, you are going to do what I say because we are following this mission. Another difference between the two is with the general, the mission remains fixed. It remains, therefore, consistent. And there is a growing and increasing clarity in the relationship with the mission. So a general can lead men where he is completely in charge, and their offsets are not accommodated in any functional way. However, these people, because of the clarity of that external mission, because of its stability, they will increasingly become more overlapped, and therefore somebody could follow a general and not be dysfunctional in their alliance, because they agree with the mission. With the tyrant, however, because it's not external, because it is not consistent, because it is really a matter of his individual state, where is he on the roller coaster ride of states that he presents to the people around him, there is not that stability, and therefore they cannot increase the overlap while remaining functionally themselves. So I've often said before, tyrants create traitors, because the tyrant is going to have the person who is being tyrannized, the nail or the receiver. That individual is either going to lie to the tyrant and tell the tyrant what he wants to hear, betraying the tyrant in that way, or he is going to repress his own identity, betraying himself, betraying the self-alliance in the process in order to accommodate what the tyrant wants them to do, which is why the tyrants create traitors. The person is either going to betray the tyrant or the person is going to betray themselves. Either way, betrayal does not make for functional, sustainable alliances, right? So the tyrant, when he is building alliances, and from a leadership standpoint, and this gets to where the thumbnail comes in, as a leader, one of the basic, fundamental tenets of being a leader is never crushing the identity of the followers. If I crush a follower's identity, me being in a leader role, them being in a follower role, just to use those terms for that dynamic, if I crush their identity, I am running or operating on borrowed time. it's sort of like the hourglass turns over as soon as you crush a person's identity. It's just a matter of time before they are useless or they're gone. I often, I found myself coaching this or navigating this particular example with parents. And, in my, the people who deal with me are men most of the time. And I don't coach women. And the men that come to me will oftentimes have issues with their children where it's like, I know I'm being too hard on them, or I don't want to be too hard on them. Or how do I go about this while not making them hate something? How do I go about this while making them engage with something without hating me? And one of the first things that I bring up is, well, we're not allowed to be a tyrant. We're not allowed to be a tyrant. We could be a tyrant to our children when they're about to run into traffic. We could say, where the fuck are you going? Grab them by their neck. Like, do whatever you got to do. That's tyrant time, right? So understand then autocratic leadership in general, but certainly the functional application of being a tyrant is good for a short-term sort of acute fixed issue, a problem. Kid's about to run into the street. No, you're not going there. And that's technically a tyrant dynamic in that instant, but it's very easily understood why that's the case, right? But when you have an individual who is looking to have his son fall in love with reading, if we make no allowance for the delta, the difference, the space between where the child is not loving reading and where the child is that does love reading, that transition from a leadership point of view, if we don't allow for that distance and the transition, the traveling of that road from one point to another, then we're reducing it to a switch. We're reducing it to a button. All I have to do is make this one thing known, and they will be where I need them to be. And when articulated that way, it doesn't make sense. And we know it doesn't make sense. But to the tyrant, everything's a button. It's, hey, I want you to go to the store and buy me soda. They think that that's all that's needed to make that happen. If somebody is passive, if somebody is submissive to the tyrant, if that is the dynamic, then they'll go, okay, what kind of soda? And they'll go, and the tyrant won't be any wiser because of it. Like, okay, I pressed the button, go get me a soda button, and the person went and got it. But if the tyrant were to say, go get me a soda, and the guy said, well, how about you go fuck yourself? How about you get your own soda? That does not fit the framework of how the tyrant expects people to respond to his directions. So in that dynamic, the tyrant has an option. Do I approach this, mission differently? Or do I increase the pressure until this individual betrays himself enough to listen to what I said? So here's another thing about being a tyrant. If you are surrounded with people who you could become a tyrant to, and it is still effective, then you are surrounding yourself with weak, passive, submissive people. Now, they might not be weak, passive, and submissive people, but worth noting is that is at a minimum the facade they're showing you. So another liability of being a tyrant is people may accommodate you as a way of manipulating you. People may tell you what you want to hear because it's so easy to have you feel you're getting your way and have you feel the decisions that you're making is everything is one button away from getting what you want. If they can allow you to think that, they might be able to work behind the scenes to get more of what they want using you as a tool in the process. So one of the things I mentioned earlier was the tyrant has a tunnel vision where they want what they want, and there's no room for negotiation. There's no room for the allowance of the preferences of another individual, because the other individual's identity and the preferences that go along with it are utterly irrelevant to the tyrant. I don't have time for that bullshit. says the tyrant. So being tyrannical, you're somebody who is very easily manipulated. And the person who has the temperament to effectively put on the facade of the nail of the receiver is the person who learns how to manipulate the manipulator. So what do we get out of this? What are the, the functional, if I'm giving you guys some actionable advice on how to avoid first being a tyrant, it's number one, have gratitude for the fact that the people around you are different from you. Why? Because that offset will create a stimulating level of friction as you engage them that makes these relationships interesting. If you are surrounded by people who present themselves as having no offset from who you would want them to be, very often they are not engaging. These relationships become drags, or the lack of stimulation really just makes them a waste of resources and investment because there's really nothing you get out of them. No more than somebody would get out of, utilizing a tool. So having a gratitude for people being different from you allows you to sort of curb the tendency we may have, because I consider myself a recovering tyrant, probably should have said that in the beginning. That is what I certainly say that I am. When we can build that gratitude, we sort of dull, if not eliminate, the drive we have to get our way and control people directly. You have the encouragement of having to figure out how to best navigate this alliance, and the encouragement comes in the form of you get better at doing it. Sometimes when you have a level of friction that maybe grows up into a level of an obstacle, and you're able to navigate that in an alliance without trying to crush the other's identity, there is a power to be had on the other side of that the tyrant never realizes. I remember when I was in high school, there were always these kids. I was popular in high school, I would say, because I was very confident and I played sports, and I liked getting along with people for the most part. But I was also very tyrannical. So if there were people there who were very strong-minded, or they themselves were tyrants, it was like two silverbacks running into each other in the jungle. It's like one of us has to defer, and I did not defer to people. So it was either I needed to be away from people or they deferred to me. And if somebody was maybe tyrannical themselves, but they agreed subconsciously to be the nail in this hammer and nail dynamic, I never chastised them for it. I allowed them to keep whatever identity they had, so long as they made that deferral to me. But I always noticed in high school and in life, and I think you guys will identify with this, or this will resonate with you, that there are people who just get along with people, right? People who just have a temperament and demeanor that is so non-threatening that it's just easy for people to vibe with them. And these people have great alliances as a result of that. Now, I'm not talking about the merchants, the politicians, the prostitutes that I go into great detail describing in the book. I'm talking about people who just have a temperament that I would describe as not needing the approval or participation of other people. And they have this sort of innate equilibrium where they can interact with people and the people don't feel that they're being challenged or that somebody's trying to use them for something. They just show up and they're vibing, and they're chill. I was driving with my oldest son yesterday, and I'm a big fan of those Tiny Desk concerts on I don't know, what is it, NPR, YouTube, and they released I think it was yesterday, a Post Malone performance. And Post Malone, I like some of his music, and like he's definitely got a vibe to him that doesn't really overlap with who I am and what I'm about. However, one of the things that I articulated to my son was, This guy, this Post Malone singer guy, every time I've seen him interacting, not performing, but interacting in some way, he always has this air about him that he's just grateful for everything. And that translates to a lot of the connection that people have with him. Here's this guy that doesn't think he's better than anybody, is so grateful that he's at where he's at, and everything that he does displays that. It communicates that. And he has a huge following, partially, I would say, if not because of that, but certainly enhanced by that, right? Well, to connect that to the high school analogy that I was talking about before, there were always these kids that just got along with everybody. They got along with the nerds. They got along with the jocks. They got along with the, in the Bronx, the drug dealers. They got along with the good guys and the bad guys and everybody in between. But they weren't positioning themselves as some sort of politician, or it wasn't some formula they were running. Is that these people, it was the opposite actually, is that these people never really wanted anything. And they appreciated everybody for who they were. They never put any sort of judgment or expectation on somebody to where the other person would feel that they were trying to get them to change. And these people were able to get along with everybody as a result. I will say that is not me. That is not my temperament. That is not how I am constructed. However, there is certainly something to be said for me acknowledging the power in alliance building that type of temperament and demeanor can create, and constantly looking how I could sort of implement that into my approach to the alliances that I have. When you're a tyrant, you're always right. And either people understand that you're right, they're too stupid to understand you're right, or they're in the process of understanding that you're right, and ultimately they'll get there. So another liability of being a tyrant is that we close ourselves off to experience and a learning that comes from that experience. We're showing up with a bunch of answers. And a lot of time we'll use confirmation bias to just take these problems that we have and turn them into questions that we already have the answers for. We're not truly present when we're a tyrant because we're showing up with the outcome already in mind. There's no sort of open-mindedness that allows for the possibility that there's information to be gained, that there are lessons to be learned, that there is an evolution or an upgrade waiting to be had. We're already right? In jiu-jitsu, to use an analogy, there is a phenomenon where you'll have an individual in the beginning that just moves the right way, that just gets it. And they don't really have to struggle. And they don't have a misunderstanding in their relationship with jiu-jitsu that requires a little bit more focus than they'd want. Like everything's just easy. These people, if they don't build a relationship with the pressure that comes with a little bit of uncertainty, they will eventually create walls, a ceiling around the experience that they have to never grow beyond that. I could say now, as somebody who opened a school, a jiu-jitsu school, 20-something years ago, as a blue belt, which, for those of you who don't know, is just the second belt in jiu-jitsu, of 5, by the way. So it's not like there's 2 belts and it's the second one. That's a good thing, right? No, there's 5 belts, 10 years on average to get, the last one, the black belt. I was a blue belt and I opened a school. At the time, it was more out of necessity. I had to do that because it was a bad situation I was in that I had left to start my own school. However, I will absolutely acknowledge that there was a weight that I had to carry that impeded my individual development as a jiu-jitsu practitioner. Because early on, I had the added responsibility and obligation of leading other people through their journey. And if I am designated the leader, there are times where I have to get them to where they want to go, sometimes to the detriment and at the cost of where I as an individual needed to go. And that was something that I've had to wrestle with this entire time. I've had many students over the years, say that they want to open up schools. And one of the first things I tell them is like, don't. Well, the context of it is, it's like there's no more training like you're used to training when you open a school. And they don't realize that. They realize, that it's like the entrepreneur who's tired of making other people rich and he opens up a business. Oftentimes these schools, it's not like they're, I'm tired of making MC rich, so I'm going to go get my own. Oftentimes it's just like, hey, I want to have my own spot so I could train all day, every day, and I could do this instead of that. And maybe the Jungle Gym MC school does things a little differently than I want to. And they have this idea. Then they open up a school, and next thing you know, they're not training as much. They're not competing as much. It's like now they have to learn how to run a business. Now they have to learn how to become a therapist, a school teacher, a babysitter, all these different things that school owners in the beginning have to be to the people that are in their school. I would say that, it's important that we understand keeping an open mind allows us to maximize the rate at which we build a relationship with all of these things. Tyrants, ultimately, though, will reduce the environment to match their understanding of it. I have a power program that I had made called Mind Killers. And one of the mind killers, which is sort of like a take on biases, individual biases, and archetypes based on these biases, I called it the vacuum cleaner. And the vacuum cleaner is somebody who their entire world winds up being this box. And they're constantly vacuuming and cleaning that box because to them, their world is perfect. And the obviously the catch of it is their world is this little box. So sure, they can act like everything's perfect because they've never grown beyond the borders of the reality that they've designed. So they don't know what uncertainty is like. They don't know what having to listen to somebody else and get advice and leadership from somebody else is like. They don't know. They don't understand that dynamic because they've mastered their box and they keep it clean by vacuuming it every day. And that closed mind is rationalized by, but look how clean everything is, and it's a sort of a trap, this circular logic that puts people in that situation that oftentimes it takes some almost traumatic level event to sort of break the wall of to get them to open their mind, meaning oftentimes that transition out of that mindset comes by way of necessity. It's like, yeah, your understanding of this limited world that you've created for yourself does not address the situation you're in right now. So you better learn some shit. And that's a lot of times how the tyrant starts to move past. It's how it happened with me. I remember I was a somewhat successful competitor, and my guys, my team was doing well in competitions and stuff. And like so many, I'm almost embarrassed even saying this out loud, but like so many new school owners, I was at that point eventually where I was like, of course people should train with me. My school's the best. I'm better than all the other competitors' schools. Like, why would anybody go there? You should be in my school. And who they were as individuals and how their identity vibed with mine and the environment of the school that I created, that was never a concern of mine. I never really addressed that. I didn't give a shit. Didn't matter. Clearly, you should be training with me. And that was the tyrant's lens, right? It was very limited because of it. And I burned a lot of relationships early on because of that. Always thinking I was right. Never realizing, like I had mentioned earlier, the distance between where they wanted to be and where they were, and how long of a path that they actually needed to traverse in order to make that change. To me, it was like, no, just be this person and you'll get better at being this person. There was no building. There was no giving them time to understand and build a relationship with things as it evolved. It's like, think about it. You have a genius, or let's just say a super high IQ. Maybe that's a genius. Maybe that's the same thing. But a very, very smart kindergarten student. He's not ready for calculus necessarily. He's not ready for university level physics, or, there's a certain point where it's like, yeah, he's really smart. Can he do calculus? Well, he's only in kindergarten. But you said he's really smart. Yeah, but he's only in kindergarten. One doesn't need to be a social scientist or a psychologist to understand what I'm talking about. It's like, well, yeah, he's smart, but he's smart for a kindergartner. He's like, the pace at which everybody else is compared to him at this point is just different. He's accelerated. He's advanced compared to his peers. But it's not like he's already there. We still have to give him some time to get there. Maybe he'll get there, in 3 years where everybody else needs 10, but he still has that path to walk. The Tyrant doesn't allow for that, right? So it's just unnatural, the expectations that Tyrants placed on the people that they're engaging with through alliance, right? All right. Johann Saxer writes, after I take a sip, I was part of an online community for a long time. I thought it was cool because I was an admin. I could gatekeep like the rest of the people in it. Blows to say I was just as bad as the Tyrant running it. And I would say that that is what winds up happening. If you guys, I don't know if you guys know Sam Hyde. He's a buddy of mine, former student, comedian. He has this, so I think it's his best video, Officer Maggot. And look it up. And it is, I'm not even going to get into it because I'll probably get the video demonetized, but incredibly funny, completely inappropriate, not safe for work, all that stuff. You're forewarned. But he plays a character, a cop, who is, in his own words, power tripping. And it's certainly a phenomenon that we see with people when given authority who have no context of identity in wherever they have an authority with. Meaning, if I don't have a codified, almost or could be codified relationship with what is right and what is wrong and who I am in reference to that right or wrong code, when I'm given authority, it is only natural that I am going to use the interaction that that authority affords me to codify what that means. Meaning, I'm going to be letting everybody else know what's right and wrong, because that is the only way I'm going to know, because I don't have a functional understanding of it separately from the environment that I'm an authority in, right? So this is something you'll see with police a lot of times. You'll get somebody that was, a nail his whole life, and everybody else knew he was a nail, but if you asked him, when he looked in the mirror, he saw a baby hammer. And then he becomes a cop, and he's given the authority, the power to actually solidify that identity as a hammer, and that's exactly what it becomes. And you'll see these guys, they're always getting into ego exchanges during the course of their work. It's like they're getting mad at people, like they're taking things personally. And, you've heard me say about talk about this before, where it's like, motherfucker, you're at work. Why are you getting so angry? I understand people are people. But again, the more of an understanding of who you are, your morality at an individual scale through self-alliance, the less likely authority will spill over into tyranny when put into a situation where you're a leader. Right. So it's one of those things. It's like, yeah, you will become a tyrant very quickly. My students over the years, sometimes somebody becomes a coach and they're great, and they connect with people. They tell them what they need to hear in order to keep that movement and that progress going. And I've had other students who were like, little pie mays, like little tyrant, autocrat, probably more general than tyrant in their mind, because I'm doing what the jungle gym, expects from me as a leader. And, but the dynamic between them and the student was just perceived as a complete tyrant because they never did a good enough job to articulate the external mission that they were both on. Right. So even a general without an understanding of that external mission is perceived as a tyrant, by the person who's following them. And it's a lot of times it's a temperament thing. It's who you are when you are given that authority. And are you somebody that recognizes, this is why protocols are so important, why they're so valuable. It's because it is almost like a list that you could sort of check off your actions by, to make sure that you're not relying on subconscious decision making in the moment. It's like the person who's trying to quit drinking alcohol. He could tell himself, well, you can go to the bar and hang out because that's where all your friends are, but just don't drink. It's like, oh yeah, is that all it takes? Or you could more functionally say, I'm not capable of saying no to a drink, so I'm not going to go to the bar. Or I am not capable of not going to the bar, so I am not going to maintain the friendships and alliances with all the people that are always in bars, because that will lead me to be here. And it's like when you have this external understanding of how to act, you save yourself from yourself, in the beginning. And then you start to program and evolve your subconscious to be more on mission with who you're trying to be. But yeah, somebody who doesn't have a tight understanding of self-alliance, who's given authority, yeah, they're a tyrant in the making, pretty normal, pretty common. So not having read this, Yarn Saxon writes, I was a drunk asshole when I was given that authority. Now I'm almost 2 years sober. My morals changed. Well, there it is. There it is in a nutshell. That's spot on. Thank you for sharing that. Aaron writes, suddenly gets there and just one beer. I imagine that turning into a lampshade 1 hour later. And that's exactly how it happens. That is exactly how it happens. Me, when I was, my main cathartic vehicle growing up was violence. I'd be in a bad mood. I'd go out and pick a fight, and I'd find somebody who I thought deserved to get their ass kicked, and I would do it. And when I realized that is not a functional way to participate in society or in a tribe, to be a respected individual, violence can't be your catharsis. Violence can't be your therapist. Not a lot of people are going to want to be around you if that is the case. I wound up going into sports and athletics, and it's like, yeah, training and all these things happen. And then I stopped training as much. Right. And it was a bunch of, excuses basically of, first, this was something that needed to happen. I needed to evolve the systems of my school. So I couldn't be a one-man show. I needed to rely on other people. And if I was going to grow, and in order to rely on other people, I had to create the systems that they could adhere to so I could, measure, how well that they're doing. All that being said, it just wound up me not training as much. And then not training as much, then I moved to PA. So now my school isn't in PA. My school's in the Bronx. It's 2 hours away. So I wasn't even at the school as much. So the opportunity to train wasn't as valid. And I didn't compensate effectively when I evolved the systems of the school. So it's like, sure, yeah, I wound up putting on weight, but it wasn't just because I wasn't training as much. It's because training was the substitute for violence, which was the vehicle of catharsis. It was my therapist, right? When I was stressed out and anxious, I would get into a fight. I would feel better. When I didn't have that, I would train. When I was stressed out, I would feel better. Now I didn't have that access the way that I did. I didn't even articulate it to myself to where I preemptively was trying to replace it with something else. So what did I wind up settling on? Fucking Entenmann's and Haagen-Dazs, right? It's like, yeah, stressed out. I can't hit anything. I can't go and train. I'm going to eat this fucking cake, and I'm going to feel better while I'm watching some TV show. And ironically, usually the TV show is about somebody who wasn't sitting down eating cake and fucking ice cream, So, again, like with everything that I talk about, all of these processes were things that I fucked up significantly, had the wherewithal to sort of self-reflect, and then compensate for those deficiencies by developing formulas. And it's gotten to the point where there's an entire system of how I engage these things that are very typical and common amongst people who have a lot of overlap with my journey. Men, entrepreneurs, men, fathers, husbands, people who have those situations that have the deficiencies and obstacles that go along with it, I've probably fucked it up at some point, and I got some stuff to help you work on it. All right. That's how that evolution occurred. All right. So the mind of the tyrant leader. I think I gave it a good go. I think I gave you guys a bunch of good content to sort of meditate on and apply, where you see fit in your own lives. I think I'm going to call it there. I appreciate you all for watching. You guys know the links are in the description. I'll be here next Wednesday. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. This is me trying to stay disciplined in the things on YouTube that work. Also, a lot of people participate and comment in the comment section, the live chat, I think it's called. Do me a favor, if you have something that you've gotten out of this, or maybe, we're talking about tyrants, a time where you were a tyrant, or maybe somebody you knew that was a tyrant. Describe that individual in the comments, and maybe I'll hit you up with a reply and some feedback on what that is. Either way, I'll be here next week. I appreciate you guys being here. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.